In 2015, my best friend passed away. He was a storyteller, the closest thing to a real-life bard I've ever met. He was Norwegian on his mom's side, so he'd talk about Viking myth, his heritage, how he basically lived in a small castle when he'd go visit. Even just the stories about fishing in glass-clear water were enthralling with that natural gift. We'd even freestyle rap together, just messing around, and his freestyles were narratives too, about goofy stuff like being a purple octopus or shoveling shit in a Denny's parking lot. The visualization was always shockingly good despite the dumb subject matter. He'd even tell stories when you told him something troubling or asked for his help. Never advice in the strict sense, but the stories would always impart something. You'd be sitting there like, what was that supposed to mean? And it hit you like a week later. He never gave me any directly, and I'd still say he gave the best advice. So anyway, the gameplay in Fallout New Vegas kind of sucks. I don't really think that's a controversial statement. Most people either play this game purely for the nostalgia or modded to hell to improve the experience. What is it about that experience, though, that makes this game better in so many ways than Fallout 4? And from any perspective other than gameplay, it is, in my opinion. Is it nuance, the amount of adjustable circumstances based on your decision-making? That's certainly part of it. Choice has a real impact in the Mojave, and you can actually shape the state of the world pretty massively by the end of the game. This game was ahead of its time in that regard. Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring are some of a precious few semi-recent examples for the player possessing that kind of narrative control, feeling like you're at a switchboard rather than on a roller coaster. That being said, while this is a factor, I feel like this merely plays into the true defining characteristic of this game rather than encompassing it. Is it the sense of discovery? I mean, that isn't to say there is no discovery. There's something really addictive about looking through the ruins of this desolate no man's land. Not even necessarily for loot, but for notes and terminals, things that, while typically providing an additional option for a quest, also provide dramatic context for a pained society or the thriving one that existed long before. But there's also a lot of, okay, I guess this is here. It's not to say that there's something wrong with having explorable areas that are somewhat less significant. I mean, if everything is significant, it starts to get a little like, yeah, okay. Oh, a can with the top facing west. What does it mean? I'm looking at you, FromSoft fans. Just kidding. I love FromSoft. Don't unsubscribe. But as much as I love exploring the Mojave, the exploration isn't why it's good for me. It's not the thing that if it were removed from the game would be shit. We can observe that pretty easily just by noting how many games exist that have a lot to explore, quote unquote, but no reason to push through exploring it. Just like the choice element, it plays into the defining feature of the game, but does not encompass it. You know, it's really amazing what people can live without. What we have lived without rather happily in the past. Obviously, we have the bodily requirements, but what are the spiritual requirements? What feature makes the game we're always playing shit when you take it out? What hurts us the most when it's gone? Over these past 9 years, I've lost a lot. I've had businesses fail, been ripped off, had cars break down at times I really could have used them. Nearly been evicted, been on the verge of homelessness, almost gone to prison. Most of these things I can barely even remember now. I still remember what he looked like in that hospital bed. I can still hear the beeping of his vitals. Last month was his death anniversary, and I can still feel the wrongness of it every April. People are what really make the impact, really lift or wound you. The defining feature of New Vegas is its characters. New Vegas writes characters that are written well enough to feel like people you know. stepping outside of the ones and zeros that define them and into the shoes of your loved ones. Relatability you can feel in their behavior. Complex people, people that make terrible errors and suffer for them. People that put everything into something, and it isn't quite enough. People just doing their best to exist. The lucky and the unlucky. The mending and the breaking. New Vegas paints in shades of gray. No right is entirely right. No wrong is entirely wrong. As much as we love to play the polarization game within the context of the real world, we know that this is exactly how it is here too. Even neutrality is tainted with apathy and inaction, an unwillingness to stand up for those being wronged, and an inability to dig for an answer, despite the fact that we know that if you go far enough in either direction, you'll simply reach the other side. Keep going and you'll go back around. We struggle to plant our feet because we've begun to empathize with more sides. You can't be neutral on a moving train, but at this point, most of us are just begging someone to stop the train. Real people are hypocritical when necessary, believing what they have to in order to keep going. Real people lie to themselves, at times needing a fanciful delusion over painful truths. We can't always handle everything. We can't always cope without fantasy. And despite the numerous shortcomings of people, they are all that makes any of this worth it, and why games like Fallout New Vegas can succeed despite having the responsiveness of my buddy I mentioned earlier. Boo! He would have laughed at that, fuck off. When video games first broke into the world scene, they were exactly that. Just fun loops, not all that different from its predecessors like backgammon or Jenga. But they progressed into this medium for storytelling that I think surpasses film and print in a lot of ways just from an immersion standpoint. Games have classics now, much like literature, and I'd say New Vegas actually stands among them because of the characters. These flawed masterpieces struggling for survival in a world that lately is disturbingly more like a projection than a fictionalization. They give a wasteland that visually is showing its age, a life beyond technical brilliance and graphical fidelity. We remember history, largely through the stories of people who made it. History is events experienced through people, not happenings independent of us. New Vegas gave us a history through its populace. Joshua Graham, God's wrath incarnate, a Mormon who grew up during peaceful times. He left to spread the good word and found himself the first legate of the Legion, a man of God now known across the Mojave not for tactical brilliance or strategy, but sheer will and brutality. After being severely burned during the Legion's loss in the battle for the Hoover Dam, Joshua returned home, welcomed by his community as the prodigal son, forgiven for his atrocities. The Legion uses a local tribe, the Whitelegs, to tie up loose ends and butchers Graham's community, chasing the remaining to the Zion Canyon where they prepare for their last stand. The courier is faced with the choice. They can allow the death of Salt Upon Wounds, the tribe's leader, either at their hands or at Joshua's, both of which more or less leads to the return of the legate, the militant force justifying his sin under the blanket of God's will. Or they can convince Graham to let him live, showing mercy to a monster, hating the sin but loving the sinner. But we can't expect God to do all the work. I could go on. There are so many characters that could be the subject of a video like this. Stories within stories. A history all its own. It really makes me concerned for where things are going right now. I feel as if games are regressing a bit, stories becoming less of a work of passion and more of an excuse for gameplay. That is, if it even has a story at all. There are so many survival crafting games that, to me, always just kind of felt like a pile of Legos, which is awesome, and I've definitely sunk some hours into games like this. You know, there's so many competitive shooters and sports games, no story to be found, and to be honest, let's keep it that way, as those sports game storylines are fucking painful. Also, there's, been a wave of those content games that don't really have a story of any kind and are just a platform for funny videos, really. You could probably enjoy a couple of rounds of any of them with some buddies in a joint, but it's a pretty shallow pool. But that's kind of where we're at, right? We've grown to resent our own depth. You can really see this in modern romantic relationships as people run at the first sign of anything other than perfect behavior, citing red flags or toxicity. And while you can break off a romance for any reason, and it's your decision, the majority of times I've heard about these reasons that people cycle out their partner like a bad air filter. It just sounds like a person, being something other than completely predictable, fully surface level, and totally understandable, which none of us are. And this is why even in many of the games that do have a story right now, they're just super bland. Just Mary Sue's and Marty Stu's doing the right thing, and the bad guys are bad and there's nothing redeemable about them. Or it's just pointlessly nihilistic with no upsides and everything is just bleak and downtrodden, and frankly that sucks just the same. It's hollow and easy. It's one thing to want to make a game that is chill and doesn't ask much of you, something like Minecraft or Stardew Valley, relaxation games, but those are games that developers wanted to make. I don't think a lot of these stories are being written because people want to write them. I think they're written to appease the largest number of people, hit intended numbers. It's closer to technical writing than creative passion and algorithm to generate good headlines. But at the same time, I can't really blame them because we kind of asked for it. We don't want depth. We want easy. We want a 60-second synopsis, dopamine hits, slick UI, things that work. I'm talking to myself as much as I am anyone else right now because I am absolutely guilty of this. As games further become this escapist haven that we retreat to from our lives, we've grown to resent what looks like life in it. Bugs that used to be rampant in some of our favorite titles and even sort of endearing in a way are now a terrible eyesore or a massive inconvenience. We want the fantasy. We don't want ugly truths, the remnants of the flawed people that created this thing we spend time with. And I can empathize with why. We're drowning in ugly truths. We're staring down a multitude of crises in every direction: economic, social, environmental, spiritual, developmental. We've been kicking problems under the bed for so long that it's 8 feet off the ground. We can see it, and everyone is at a loss for what to do. But I think the first step is running away from easy, not simple, because simplicity can be our highest form of brilliance, but easy. Simple does not mean easy. Supporting each other is simple. A long time ago, I wanted to be a career musician. No one made me feel more like I could do that than my friend. It wasn't that he never gave criticism. That's why he bothered to give you criticism. He'd tell you that something was good and that you were so close to making it great. Supporting each other isn't easy. I cannot even accurately describe to you how often I would feel envy at the success of others in the music industry. When I'd analyze it at a deeper level, I knew it wasn't because I was untalented, but that while I loved making music, I didn't really like the business of it. I didn't like being a musician, really. That didn't stop me from foolishly expecting the world to just make it happen for me, offer me success when I had one foot out the door. I am, on my worst days, a hugely judgmental asshole. My biggest strength is my awareness of that. I don't stick by any of my judgments because, frankly, I know they aren't worth anything. Same goes for my judgments of myself. I've always struggled with being a friend to people. As much as I love having them, my social battery is like that phone that you unplug and it immediately drops to 15%. I try to support the businesses of people I know, support their pursuits and ideas, give referrals for jobs, anything I can do, but I suck at keeping up. In a place like New Vegas, supporting someone would mean more struggle. And that could be the case in the real world too. Supporting means to give, and to give means to have less. We've been given enough that we're afraid to lose it, despite how much worse it could be. Loving people is simple. My friend was probably the only person I've ever known that would just randomly tell you that he loved you. He'd say this to his friends before he hung up the phone. Not even remotely worried about that seeming weird, even among a bunch of high school assholes who probably made fun of him for it at least a couple times. Loving people is not easy. Everyone is so afraid of each other now. This isn't necessarily unjustified. The amount of fear-mongering presented by both news and popular media has left most people at near schizophrenic levels of paranoia. We've retreated to our shells, locked up in our houses covered in cameras with deadbolts clicked and guns by our bed. Everything is structured, so safe. And that isn't inherently bad, but it also reduces the beauty of our differences melding together when we're all seeking safety and sameness. We've become so used to the echo chambers we've been granted online that we meet another person and are upset that we don't see a mirror. We give up highs in pursuit of curbing lows, heading over to r/reinforce my current beliefs instead of having actual friends because it's easy to avoid being challenged. My friend and I were really not that much alike. He was a very tidy person. At the time, I was definitely not. He'd typically spend the first 30 minutes of us hanging out cleaning my room. I'd be like, dude, would you sit down? And he'd be like, yeah, hold on, as he's cramming stuff into my closet. I was more of an intuitive hippie type, and he was really practical and good at building stuff, numbers. It bothers me to think that if we'd met in the current state of how friendship is determined for most people, we might never have been friends. In the wasteland, love is the precursor to loss. Life is so fragile and inconsistent. There's so many ways to lose those you love that you have no control over. We're better at pretending in the real world, but it's true here too. I think the stories we're writing are becoming watered down and safe because we're afraid of writing the same thing we're afraid of experiencing. I think we fear the loss of control. We fear the chaos and inconsistency, the random, inescapable horror of probability, the wild card of human behavior. It's hard to see yourself in a monster, equally hard to feel the guilt of someone viewed as a hero. Good guys that have no flaws are easy to support. Bad guys who are all bad are easy to vilify. The only problem is that easy is boring, fake. Easy doesn't last. Our best art, and make no mistake, these masterpieces of video gaming are art, comes from staring down our fears and making the connections that we know we'll lose. Because the connection is so beautiful, it's worth what you know is coming. Writing in the depth, the inconsistencies, the atrocities and triumphs. Writing people that you can be so angry at one second and horribly depressed that they died from their own foolishness the next. Died in a way that could easily be you on a day that you make a bad decision. Could easily be one of your loved ones, a member of your family. It may feel easier to pretend that you have control, to clamp down on your experiences, give up those highs in pursuit of curbing lows, dulling the pain temporarily. But one day you'll end up there anyway. One day you'll love someone foolishly, as everyone should. They'll be your greatest mistakes, and the only thing you'll do that matters. Truth is, the game was rigged from the start. Well, thank you guys so much for watching if you've made it to this point. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, as it really helps me grow this little channel here while I figure out what this is even going to be long term. Tell me about the mistakes that you've made that you'll never regret. Tell me about what you've lost, if it's not too painful a subject. Tell me about what you think makes this worth it. And until next time, you have a wonderful rest of your day, and don't you dare go hollow.